Eleanor Marks had spent nearly 3 decades walking the same grey-tiled halls of Halcyon and Miles Corporation. She was the kind of employee who never missed a deadline, who brought birthday cupcakes for interns, and who kept handwritten notes dating back to 2004. Her desk on the 6th floor bore the gentle wear of time, edges smoothed, a faded family photo in a chipped wooden frame, and a paperweight shaped like an owl gifted to her by a long-retired coworker. That Tuesday morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds in quiet stripes, she arrived 15 minutes early, just as she had for 29 years and 11 months. The scent of mint tea rose from her travel mug. She passed the security desk with a nod and a warm greeting for the guard, and headed to her desk expecting nothing unusual. But today was not usual. Waiting by her cubicle was Grant Wallace, her department head, dressed sharper than usual in a crisp navy suit, though his face betrayed discomfort. Beside him stood Rachel Porter from Human Resources, clutching a manila folder. "Eleanor," Grant said with a stiffness she immediately noticed, "could we have a moment in the conference room?" No chit-chat, no morning banter. Just that sentence, and a gesture toward the glass-walled room near the copier. Her pulse remained steady, but a strange tightness curled in her stomach as she followed them. Inside, the room was silent. On the table sat an envelope, neatly aligned with a capped pen. Eleanor had been through enough restructures to know what this was, but still, she sat down with composure, folding her hands in her lap. "Due to ongoing restructuring," Grant began, his voice formal and hollow, "your role has been made redundant." Rachel chimed in with the same practiced softness. "This decision was not reflective of your performance. You've been exemplary, Eleanor." The words, though kindly phrased, fell like bricks. "You've prepared this ahead of time," Eleanor said, her voice calm but deliberate. "So this isn't a discussion. It's a dismissal." Grant swallowed. "It's effective immediately. Your severance details are in the envelope, as well as an NDA we'd need signed to process everything promptly." She stared at the envelope. The NDA. The severance. But more than any of that, 3 more days. She was 3 days away from her pension vesting date. She had stayed this long, worked weekends, mentored new hires, absorbed workloads without complaint, all to secure her retirement. "This couldn't wait until Monday?" she asked, but there was no real question in her voice. The answer was clear. This had been timed. Deliberate. Precise. "You're aware," she continued slowly, "that terminating me now nullifies my pension?" Rachel looked away. Grant's jaw tightened. "We're following company protocol," he said. Eleanor stood without touching the envelope. "No," she said quietly. "You're following someone's agenda." She walked out of the conference room with her head held high. Her badge deactivated before she could exit the lobby. Her email access revoked. Just like that, 29 years and 11 months erased by a line item in someone's spreadsheet. She walked past the security desk and out into the sunlight, her scarf fluttering in the early autumn breeze. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. But deep within her, something began to shift. A seed of clarity. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed that evening, the city outside humming its usual rhythm, but her world had gone eerily still. Her small apartment in the Elmwood district was filled with the relics of a long career, certificates framed neatly on the wall, books on leadership and team psychology stacked beside the lamp, old office mementos now tinged with betrayal. She stared at the NDA lying on her kitchen table, unsigned. Her instincts told her not to sign it. Something in her gut rebelled against the silence they were trying to buy. They wanted her to walk away quietly. But Eleanor Marks had not built her career on silence. She turned her phone over in her hand. The contacts list felt like a museum of ghosts, names of colleagues long retired or relocated. Her finger hovered over one name, Clara Fielding. Clara had been her closest friend at Halcyon and Miles until she resigned 4 years ago under suspiciously similar circumstances. The rumor had been downsizing, but Eleanor remembered Clara's haunted expression that final week. She dialed before she could second-guess herself. "Eleanor." Clara's voice crackled on speaker, still familiar, still strong. "It's been years. Clara, I need to ask. When they let you go, was it before your pension vested too?" There was silence. Then a quiet, 3 days before. Eleanor felt a rush of heat crawl up her spine. "It's a pattern, isn't it?" "It's a system," Clara replied. They time terminations right before retirement benefits lock in. I only found out after I left. You're not the first. You won't be the last. What did you do about it? Eleanor asked. I tried to fight. But I was alone. My lawyer said proving intent without hard evidence was near impossible. I didn't have documents. Just instinct and timing. Eleanor's mind began ticking. She had always kept records. Email archives. Performance reviews. Even calendar screenshots. What if there was a breadcrumb trail? Do you still have your termination letter? She asked. I do. Why? Because I'm not signing anything. And I think it's time someone pulled back the curtain. The next morning, Eleanor took the bus to the local library. Without company servers to restrict her access, she could explore freely. She printed every public document she could find, press releases, board minutes, employee reviews. She compared dates, names, and quietly growing patterns. Terminations all timed suspiciously before pension thresholds. Clara was right. It wasn't just an accident. It was strategy. That afternoon, she reached out to an old friend, James Morales, a quiet but brilliant analyst who once worked in the compliance department before moving to another firm. They had shared lunch breaks for years, often discussing obscure company policy and data trends like they were mystery novels. You're digging into pension sabotage? James said after she explained. That's bold. I need help reading the numbers, Eleanor replied. And maybe finding something they thought was buried. James hesitated. Then, you've always had a nose for things others missed. I'll send you what I can dig up from my side. But Eleanor, be careful. If this goes public, they won't stay silent. She thanked him and hung up. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Eleanor sat down, surrounded by a growing stack of papers, printed emails, and handwritten notes. She wasn't just fighting for her pension now. She was fighting for every worker they had quietly pushed out. Her silence had once been their shield. But now her voice, measured calm, and filled with truth, would become their reckoning. By the end of the week, Eleanor's apartment looked more like a war room than a home. Her coffee table was buried in files and highlighters, sticky notes mapped her kitchen wall like a criminal investigation, and every surface held papers with dates, names, and patterns emerging in red ink. But the real gold came when James Morales sent her the spreadsheet. Encrypted and password protected, the file was titled simply Exit Timing versus Vesting. Inside were rows of names, hire dates, termination dates, pension vesting thresholds, and brief internal comments from various departments. The final column was labeled Rationale, and though most entries read like corporate speak, budget reallocation, department restructure, strategic shift, a few caught Eleanor's breath. One name read, Too close to vesting. Move early. Another, Hold termination until post-project closeout. Avoid triggering benefit tier. It was the kind of language that felt innocuous to the uninformed but damning to anyone with context. Eleanor printed the most critical sheets and slipped them into a folder marked in bold, Evidence. Still, she knew it wasn't enough. She needed credibility. She needed people. Survivors. She called Clara again, this time with a proposal. I'm going public, Clara. But I can't do it alone. Would you speak with me, on record? There was a long pause. I swore I'd never deal with them again, Clara said. But I'll speak. They don't deserve silence. Clara wasn't the only one. Eleanor spent the next 2 weeks calling names from the spreadsheet. Many were reluctant, afraid of legal backlash, bound by outdated NDAs. But others were furious. One man broke down sobbing when he realized he wasn't the only one who had been pushed out 3 days before his retirement benefit locked in. One woman had taken a job cleaning offices after her dismissal, convinced she had failed somehow. Eleanor's voice, steady, calm, patient, reassured them all. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for justice. Then came the decision that would define her next chapter, a meeting with investigative journalist Lena Carmichael, known for exposing corporate abuses in tech and finance. They met in a quiet cafe in Midtown, Eleanor sliding the evidence folder across the table like a confession. This is enough for an exposé, Lena said slowly, her eyes scanning a document. But if you're willing to go on record, Eleanor, it's not just a story. It's a reckoning. I'll go on record, Eleanor said without hesitation. This isn't just about me anymore. Lena leaned forward. They'll come after you. I know, Eleanor replied. But I'm not afraid of them anymore. The article published 3 weeks later under the headline, *Corporate Clockwork, the Hidden Pattern of Pre-Pension Terminations. Eleanor's face was on the front page, along with quotes from Clara, James, and 4 other former employees who had broken their silence. The piece trended within hours. Financial forums lit up. Shareholders demanded answers. The board at Halcyon and Miles scrambled for damage control, issuing a vague statement promising an internal review. But the damage had been done. Eleanor didn't celebrate. Not yet. She sat quietly in her apartment that night, the glow of her laptop reflecting off her glasses as she read the hundreds of comments pouring in. Former employees. Families. Young professionals thanking her for speaking out. And then, just before midnight, her phone rang. It was Lena. You might want to sit down, she said. A whistleblower from inside Halcyon just reached out. They're ready to share internal memos. This goes deeper than we thought. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, taking in a slow breath. The war wasn't over. But for the first time in years, she was no longer fighting alone. The whistleblower's email arrived the next morning under the alias Sentinel-42. It contained a link to an encrypted drive and a single sentence. These documents are from the executive compliance logs, archived weekly. Use them wisely. Eleanor hesitated before clicking, knowing full well what she was stepping into. When she did, her screen flooded with hundreds of internal memos, time-stamped meeting notes, and confidential HR communications. At first glance, much of it appeared mundane. But then the pattern emerged: code names, repeat phrases, and an unmistakable trail of decision-making that traced all the way to Halcyon's senior board. One memo stood out. Titled Cost Efficiency Strategy, Tier C, it outlined quarterly targets for cost-controlled terminations in departments with senior employees nearing benefit thresholds. It included directives like review tenure cycles, evaluate contract renewal triggers, and most damning of all, a bullet point labeled Anticipated Litigation Fallout with an attached risk estimate. This wasn't poor management. It was premeditated. Eleanor sent the files to Lena, who called her back in less than 10 minutes, her voice sharp with urgency. This isn't just a story anymore. This is criminal liability. If this document is verified, it could trigger an SEC investigation. Lena looped in a legal analyst, and within 2 days, a formal inquiry request had been filed. Eleanor, meanwhile, took her case to the Department of Labor's Whistleblower Division, carrying with her a USB filled with damning evidence and a portfolio of signed testimonies from her former colleagues. The officer who received her sat back in silence as he reviewed the files. You understand what happens next, he said finally. This could take years. You'll be monitored. Your name will be protected as long as possible, but once this escalates, they'll try to discredit you. I'm ready, Eleanor said. I have nothing left to lose. But Halcyon wasn't staying quiet. Within a week, their legal team sent Eleanor a cease and desist letter, claiming breach of confidentiality and defamation. The letter arrived hand-delivered, stamped with bold legal threats, and signed by Halcyon's chief counsel. But Eleanor had expected this. Her response was simple. She uploaded a video, her first public statement, framed by a neutral background, speaking directly to the camera. My name is Eleanor Marsh. I worked at Halcyon and Miles for 29 years. I was terminated 3 days before my pension vested. I am not the only one. I have seen the documents. I have heard the stories. And I will not be silenced. The video went viral overnight. Across social platforms, the hashtag 3 days too early began trending. Former employees from other corporations shared similar stories, and Eleanor became a reluctant symbol, an advocate for fairness, dignity, and corporate accountability. She was invited to speak on news segments, interviewed by financial journalists, and even contacted by a group of lawmakers drafting labor reform legislation. Her inbox overflowed. But in the middle of the media firestorm, Eleanor remained calm. She returned every message that mattered. She kept receipts. And she never raised her voice. Then came the final twist. A second whistleblower stepped forward, not from Halcyon, but from one of their major clients. They shared confidential communications that revealed Halcyon had advised several other companies on talent renewal strategies, a sanitized term for the same pre-pension termination tactic. Now it wasn't just a company on trial. It was a system. Eleanor sat in her small kitchen, the hum of her refrigerator the only sound, staring at the newest file. She wasn't afraid anymore. The war she had started had grown bigger than her, and she had no intention of backing down. The storm had just begun. By the time the federal investigation was formally announced, Eleanor's case had evolved from a personal crusade into a national headline. Major outlets picked up the story, public interest surged, and even shareholders of Halcyon and Miles began demanding answers. Under mounting pressure, the company convened an emergency board meeting at their San Francisco headquarters, a towering glass structure that once symbolized dominance and prestige. Now, it was under siege from protesters below and scrutiny from the media above. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was tense. 10 members sat around the long polished table, papers rustling as the general counsel briefed them on the situation. We have multiple whistleblower complaints, several legal filings, and a Department of Labor probe underway, she said, her tone clipped. We can no longer contain this. If even half of what's in the documents is corroborated, we're looking at criminal charges, not just reputational damage. The CEO, Warren Flanders, whose signature had appeared in one of the damning memos, tried to maintain composure. We followed cost-saving protocols. Our legal team cleared those strategies. But not in writing, the CFO interjected. No one's going to believe that wasn't deliberate. While they argued behind closed doors, Eleanor prepared for her scheduled testimony before a Congressional Labor Committee. She wore a simple navy suit, the same one she'd worn during her last quarterly presentation before being dismissed. Her voice did not waver as she recounted her story before the panel. I'm not just here for myself, she said. I'm here for every worker who gave their life to a company and was discarded like expired inventory before they could reap what they'd earned. The room fell silent. Lawmakers leaned forward. Reporters scribbled notes. She presented printed memos, charts, emails, all legally verified. She did not dramatize. She did not exaggerate. The truth was powerful enough. One senator, moved by the depth of betrayal, called for immediate drafting of the Pension Protection and Employee Loyalty Act, a bill aimed to prevent precisely what had happened to Eleanor and countless others. Back at Halcyon, things unraveled quickly. 3 board members resigned. An internal review exposed additional unethical termination practices in other departments. Major clients froze their contracts pending the outcome of the investigation. Stock prices plummeted. Warren Flanders issued a video apology that was roundly mocked for its insincerity. But Eleanor didn't rejoice. Instead, she met quietly with other victims, helping them compile documentation, connecting them with legal aid, and guiding them through the process she had already endured. What began as her personal story had become a foundation for others to build upon. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor received a letter from a woman in Vermont. I watched your video with my daughter, it read. She asked me, Mom, will you ever get fired right before your pension too? I told her, no, sweetheart. Because people like Eleanor made sure I won't. The words brought Eleanor to tears. Not because she had one, but because what she had done mattered. And as she looked out the window of her small home, watching the clouds drift by, she knew the fight was far from over, but it had changed everything. Forever. Months had passed since Eleanor's testimony echoed through the halls of Congress, but the waves it created still surged outward. The Pension Protection and Employee Loyalty Act had passed its initial vote with overwhelming bipartisan support, and Eleanor found herself traveling to Washington again, not as a witness this time, but as an honored guest at the signing ceremony. Her name was etched into the narrative of national reform, not because she sought attention, but because she refused to be silent. She returned home to a different rhythm of life. Gone were the early morning meetings and color-coded strategy decks. In their place, advocacy groups, pro bono consultations, and calls from journalists wanting to profile the woman who stood her ground. Eleanor wasn't interested in becoming a symbol, but she understood the importance of her story. It was no longer just hers. One brisk autumn morning, she walked into the town library and spotted a flyer, Empowered After Exit, a support network for workers rebuilding from corporate displacement. She smiled. It was the group she had co-founded just 3 months prior, now meeting regularly with dozens of members. Inside the meeting room, she saw familiar faces: an ex-teacher who had been let go before tenure, a logistics manager downsized without warning, a mother of 3 terminated during maternity leave. All of them now building again, together. As the group settled into chairs, Eleanor stood before them, holding a small notepad. She didn't need it, but the weight in her hands grounded her. "I know what it feels like to be cast aside. To have your worth measured in quarterly margins," she said, scanning their faces. "But we're not numbers on a spreadsheet. We're not footnotes in someone else.